Hello, friends. Today's chapter of the day is 1 Samuel 21, and there is a considerable amount of crazy stuff going on in 1 Samuel 21. What we know, kind of the setup, is that David is now on the run because Jonathan has tipped him off that Saul's out to get him. Saul hates David so much that he actually threw a spear at Jonathan for not hating him equally. So David decides it's a good time to get out of Dodge and seek some protection elsewhere. And the first place he goes is he goes to a place called Nob. And what's at Nob is a priest named Abimelech. Nope, Ahimelech. And Ahimelech meets David and finds David hungry and pretty much without any armor or anything else, and isn't quite sure what to do with that situation. And David says, "Do you have any bread? I need some bread." And Ahimelech says, "Well, the only bread I have is the bread of the presence, which is this sacred bread in the temple." And David essentially says, "Well, I'm hungry, and it's all we got, so please give it to me." And Ahimelech does. And it's easy to look at this and say, well, that's, wasn't exactly God's design. They probably sinned a little bit, but David needed to eat, so I guess we just move on. The problem with looking at it that way is that Jesus himself discusses this situation in Mark chapter 2. And he discusses the situation to help us understand that certain practices are in place to help us revere God and help us to understand the holiness of God. But those practices are to serve us by bringing us closer to God, and we shouldn't serve those practices. So what's happening in Mark 2 is the disciples are plucking what's left of the grain and eating it as they go through the grain fields on the Sabbath. What's happening in 1 Samuel 21 is they're eating the bread of the presence again because they have a need. So point being, Jesus is saying the Sabbath is here to bring you closer to God. It's not something that you're to be restrained by to your pain. So kind of an interesting lesson that's being taught that we really don't understand well until Jesus teaches about it in Mark chapter 2. Then it gets even crazier because David says, I could really use a sword. You got a sword here? And the priest says, well, we do have the sword that once belonged to Goliath. Remember, the guy you murdered, and you didn't murder, you killed him in battle and cut off his head and carried it around for a while? And David said, yeah, I guess that'll do. So David then takes the sword of Goliath as his sword and goes where? He goes to Gath. And why does it matter that he went to Gath? Because that's where Goliath was from. So it goes back to Goliath's hometown carrying Goliath's sword. And as he's returning to Gath, the king of Gath hears of David and hears what a great champion David is. And he's worried about David, and David is worried about his own safety going into this enemy town. And what's David's solution to this problem? Act crazy. So he's got drool coming down his face. He's acting like he's out of his mind. And the king, instead of hating David or fearing him and want to attack him, basically just says, I don't know what's going on. Get this guy out of here. So that's 1 Samuel 21. Really lots of kind of interesting stuff going on. Theologically important stuff. Things that relate back to things that have happened earlier in Scripture. But we're really getting introduced to the complexity of the character of David as he starts to give us a picture of who he is. So that's what we got, and I hope this is useful to you. Have a great Saturday.